Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We are in week 4 of great customer service. Today, I'm going to talk about the power of questions. So we've talked about the importance of hello. We've talked about the importance of smile when you say hello. We've talked about the importance of getting their name so that next time you see them, you can say, hello, Fred. Hello, Susie. You can now say hello with their name. Next, I want to talk about building some relational equity through questions. Oxford study showed that a person can improve communication skills by 400%, up to 400%, if he or she learns to ask great questions. There's just something in the power of a question. And so learning to ask customers questions. It's great in building relationships, meeting new people. Questions open the doors for you to learn about others and learn where you can serve them. You can learn what they're interested in. And so learn to be a great question asker. I was in China with my wife not too long ago, had a great experience and met a ton of her friends and relationships. We met Tong Shui men, which is classmates. We met Tong Shi men, which is workmates, and then Tong Wu men, a bunch of previous roommates from Da Shui, which is university. All right, and a little bit of Mandarin there. And so I'm sitting at tables having dinner with people that speak a different language from me. A lot of them actually had pretty good English, but I would always try to practice as much Chinese as I could. So if I could say it in Chinese, I would, and they appreciated that. And I had a great dinner in Beijing with one of her friends, sweet couple, and they treated us to Beijing roast duck. Best I ever had. It was unbelievable. Okay, I'm drooling right now thinking about it. And so I'm talking to this girl's husband while Sonny's talking to her, high school, friend, and so they're often having a great conversation. So I'm sitting here talking to a guy. I don't know this. I don't have any relationship with this man. Very nice man, very sweet, very polite. So I'm putting to practice this incredible principle of asking questions. And so I would just ask him questions about what he did. And then I'd ask him about I said, hey, what are your hobbies? What do you love to do when you're not working? And so he loved to do drones. He would fly drones out, and he loved capturing footage. And so he pulled out his phone and he was showing me footage of like wilderness and how you would try to capture, certain wild animals on film. And it was really interesting. So I just kept asking him a bunch of questions about that. And then we were done with dinner, and we left. So later, my wife gets a WeChat from her friend, and her friend was just like, man, we had such a great time meeting Eric, and he's just so nice. And it meant so much to my husband that Eric asked about his hobbies and took time to be interested in his hobbies. It just made him feel so good. And it was just a simple question that really built a important rapport with this gentleman and this family that's really important to my wife. So the power of a great question. I've never really regretted taking time, just listening and asking questions of people. I would like to take credit for this, but I really learned this reading a book by Larry King, the late Larry King, who was one of the greatest conversationalists probably ever. Definitely one of the greatest interviewers on television of all times. And he wrote a great book. And I forget the title of it, but it's just a great book. If you Googled it, Larry King, but it's just about the power of conversation. And I think it was How to Have a Conversation with Anybody, Anywhere. I think that's the title of it, or close to it. And so I learned just certain things from him. So if you want to grow in being a conversationalist, pick up that book. But I like what he said in the book. He said, I remind myself every morning, nothing I say this day will teach me anything. So if I'm going to learn, I must do it by listening. And he was the master of asking questions and then listening to what their next question is. There was another person who was famous at the same time as Larry King interviewing, and she was terrible at this. She would ask a question, the person would answer, And it was like she didn't hear anything this particular person had said and would almost ask a question that they had already just answered. And you could tell, like, you didn't listen to anything they just said. Larry King was the complete opposite of it. And it was almost funny watching the two and the contrast of how good Larry was and how terrible this other one was. So one thing he says in the book that's really good, don't ask open-ended questions. So for example, an open-ended question is this. Isn't this weather hot? Well, it's a simple answer, yes or no. Do you think the Cardinals will have another bad year? Yes or no. And so parents, we do this with our kids. How was your day? Good. What'd you do today? Things. So like if you struggle to get your kids to open up to you, change the questions that you're asking them. So, for example, Larry King would say, what do you think of this cold weather we're having this year? Or what do you think of the chances the Cardinals have to win this year? So when you leave it as an open-ended question where people can't just go yes or no, it forces at least 2 or 3 words into a conversation. And so Larry also talked about the power of just listening. A university study confirmed that effective listening can be worth as much as 20 IQ points. In other words, if you just become good at listening when people are talking, your IQ just jumped 20 points, at least in perception of those. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a bunch of IQ points laying around to waste. So I'll take that extra 20 points by listening. Actually, and funny, when I was in China, because of the language barriers, I just kind of was in a room full of people. My wife's talking and just, getting caught up, and I just smile. I just kind of sit there and smile. And then everybody would say to my wife, your husband is so nice and he's so sweet. And all I did was smile. And just the power of just listening and smiling. We should listen twice as much as we talk. And I love, I think it was Abraham Lincoln that said that. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means we should listen twice as much as we talk. There was a Harvard University professor before it went woke and crazy, who was approached by a student who asked, why are there no courses in conversation? Is there anything I can do to learn the art of conversation? This is back when they actually taught things of value that you could use. The professor answered, well, of course there is. And he probably got fired for this too. Of course there is. And if you listen, I will tell you what it is. So there ensued this long, uncomfortable silence. And then finally the student interrupted and said, well, I'm listening. And the professor replied, you see, you're learning already. So there you go, the power of great questions. Next week, we're going to learn the incredible statement, can I help you?
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gain new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.